Hello everybody, welcome back to History of Spriggs. My name is Spriggs and today we'll be talking about the First Crusade. Now before we talk about the Crusade, I need to give you a little bit of a background before the Crusade leading up to it. In 632, the Muslim forces conquered Levant, which is the area Israel and all those countries are in, and northern Africa and most of the Iberian Peninsula. But by the 11th century, Christians were going through the Reconquista and took back the Iberian Peninsula but never took the Holy Land, or the Levant. The Crusade was of the Islam expanding into the Holy Land in the Byzantine Empire. And there was a pilgrimage at Jerusalem and many other areas in the Levant and areas along. And even the city fell to the Fatimans, and they had a weak grip over the city because Fatimans, who were Islam, and the pilgrims, who were many different religions. And there was more pilgrims than there were Islams. And the Islams treated the pilgrims poorly, very poorly, and harshly. This angered the Europeans with several massacres. Several massacres. This angered the Europeans even more. Tensions were so thick. And then, at the Battle of Manzikert, a Frank said that the Muslims murdered the Christians, razing churches, towns, and castles, just pillaging and destroying this Byzantine area. And Byzantine Emperor Alexios the Comnenus wrote to Robert II of Flanders and said if they took Constantinople, thousands would be killed, and holy relics taken and destroyed, and it would be horrible for the Byzantine Empire and the Christian world. And that thousands would be killed, and he also said God would condemn you if he didn't aid him. In 1095, Pope Urban II held both the Council of Clermont and the Council of Piacenza. I hope I am pronouncing many of the names in this video right, even though I'm probably not, but I think you have a general understanding of what I'm saying. It's hard to pronounce these European names. And after the end of both these councils, they decided to the mobilization of Western Europe's armies and called for the Crusade. As he called, they all went to Constantinople and were ready to launch, but a man named Peter the Hermit, a preacher who led the People's Crusade, a separate crusade who were not called upon, or there is no records of Peter the Hermit being appointed by Pope Urban II. And with that, his army commenced basically of peasants and petty nobles in their little armies. Untrained, who lacked military discipline and lacked the knowledge of even where Jerusalem was. But Walter Sans-Avoir led a branch of the army mainly knights and more skilled soldiers, to Jerusalem, who did not lack a knowledge of where Jerusalem was. But his army was of knights. Although still in Christian territory, Peter's army found itself in trouble. And the army, led by Walter Sansavoir, plundered Belgrade and Zuman areas, modern-day Serbia, and sacked them and took basically all the supplies as they marched towards Constantinople. So, basically, Peter the Hermit's army was left with nothing and had to struggle to just get to Constantinople, which was the launching point. And he even arrived at Constantinople without much resistance. And Constantinople was the staging point for basically every crusade. And so, also, Peter the Hermit's army fought the Hungarians when they got to the Hungarian territory. And so, this also further weakened Peter the Hermit's untrained, unskilled army. But Peter's army, on August 15th, 1096, Peter's army joined Walter Sansavoire's army, and they went and arrived at Constantinople. They pillaged outside the city because, well, Peter the Hermit didn't have much control over his army. I mean, if there's an army with no military discipline, well, it's kind of hard to control an army. And so, they pillaged outside the city of Constantinople in search for food and supplies, and this prompted Alexios to hurriedly ferry them across Bosporus, which was like the river or channel that was across Constantinople, and to get to Asia Minor. And so, when they were ferried across into Asia Minor, the Crusaders split and pillaged the countryside, wandering into Seljuk territory. Basically, the Seljuk territory is the northern areas which have been fighting the Byzantines. And later you'll see the Fatimids are more southern in the area, taking more North Africa. And they wandered into Seljuk territory and around Nicaea. The far more experienced Turk massacred them at the siege of Nicaea. And the siege of Exarchegordos. And the Seljuk victory drove off the Italian-German army. Meanwhile, Peter and Walter's army fought the Turks at the Battle of Civitot. Out of 17,000 to 57,000 of Peter the Hermit's army and Walter Sansavoire's army, the exact number is unknown. Only 3,000 survived, and Walter was one of the 17 to 57,000 who died. Now it's 1097. The Crusader army was going to meet the French army at Dorylaeum. And by the way, the Crusaders went back to Constantinople, then went south with the Norman army. But the Turks surrounded them at the Battle of Dorylaeum, and the Turks were winning against the Normans, but the French quickly arrived and defeated them. The Islams were not expecting the French to arrive so soon. This greatly surprised the Islamics, and the French surrounded and, with the Normans too, destroyed this Islam force. This was also the first Crusader victory, which was huge news for the Crusaders, that something was actually starting to happen. And so they went south. They burned villages which starved the troops, and destroyed lots of Celtic lands. And the Celtic lands were never the same when the Crusaders went through them. Then, on the siege of Antioch, it started October 20th, 1097, and is considered one of the greatest sieges. And the city of Antioch was too big to surround it, so they stayed partially supplied. So Antioch was able to be partially supplied, which did not help with the siege. And so many died of starvation or deserted. Bohemond, the leader of the Norman army, which the Byzantine Emperor, Alexius Komnenos, did not like, especially because Bohemond tried to take Constantinople. And Firoz the Armenian opened the gates to the city, and they sacked it, killing most Muslims inside. A force of 40,000 Islam sieged the city again, while the Crusaders now were in the city. And they went outside to deal with the enemy. Due to lack of military discipline on the Islam side, with few casualties, the Islams fled, chasing them off, and the Crusaders chased them. Crusaders met again at the siege of Ma'ara. The Crusaders won, but the first time of cannibalism during the First Crusade. Because these sieges were big, bloody sieges, which destroyed a lot. And then they moved towards Jerusalem, the stronghold that was basically the goal of the whole crusade and the next crusades. And so, then, they made peace with the local rulers, because if they didn't, honestly, the local rulers were probably going to get crushed by the Crusades. I mean, they probably did it after they saw what happened at Antioch and sieges before. And so then, Raymond planned to take Tripoli, and Raymond was the leader of the Frank force, but was held at the siege of Arqua. The Celtics agreed to convert to Christianity if they defeated the Fatimans, who recently took Jerusalem. The siege started on June 13th, 1099. They had no wood because the forests were destroyed by the Fatimans and the Celtics before, and so no wood to make siege supplies and other things. So it looked pretty bad at first for the siege. And so they also suffered from the Palestinian heat. I mean, after all, it was June. And that is a super hot place. In fact, if I'm not wrong, one of the hottest places on Earth. And they also faced food shortages because it was hard to supply them. And on June 17th, the English and Genoese ships arrived, and the siege was back on, because the Crusaders actually fell back and sort of regrouped and waited. And they broke through the walls and killed 70,000 Islam and Jews in the city. On July 13th is when it happened. Then, on July 22nd, a council was held establishing the Kingdom of Jerusalem. Many Crusader states were made during this time, but this was one of the big ones. And they put Godfrey as the leader, one of a Frankish man. The kingdom would last until 1297. And by the way, this was all happening in 1099. But the city of Jerusalem would be taken by Saladin in 1187 at the Battle of Hattin. Then they heard of a Fatimid army moving towards them. They marched north to towards Ascalon, and they met and defeated the army, and then they marched north towards their homelands, and this was the first crusade. This was also the most successful crusades of all. At first, they experienced some difficulties. They were mainly in Asia Minor when they did that, not far from Byzantine territory. But when they regrouped, more armies came, and well, then it was a very successful crusade. And they saw many new things during this crusade. I mean, they went into lands that nobody of their country really had been to, and they hadn't been to. They found many new things and learned of many things, and brought back home things, changing a little bit of cultural things. And as they marched home, they were proud of what they did. Well, thanks for watching this video, and please subscribe to History of Spriggs, and like this video, and if you have any video ideas, or any questions, or if I need to be corrected on something, drop down in the comments down below. And share this video with a friend. If they won't listen, share with an enemy. And with that being said, Spriggs out.